And we're on. And it's officially 12 o'clock and it's a full moon today. So that was a nice little coincidence. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming on. I know different people will be kind of coming on as we're moving along. So we're just going to start on time today. And I wanted to, first of all, really thank the speakers for coming on, because it's been about 10 years since I met Barry Komisaruk. And he is our speaker on the science of orgasm and literally wrote the book. And when we met and we were talking about things, I said, I definitely want to do something with you one day. And so the day has come. And Michaela and Connie are remarkable speakers. And it's really taken me a while to be able to learn the things that I wanted to learn, to know what kind of information I wanted to both learn more of and to share with other people, and then find the speakers that are really the top of their field. So I've made this summit, they're not the only speakers that are great, but they're really the creme de la creme of their particular field. And I really wanted to make this summit that will be running the third week of September something that really focused just on 3 major areas, because it's such a broad topic and there's so many things to discuss. So I really wanted to be able to just have this as kind of a beginner to be able to allow us to see where the conversations go, and to provide forums for people, links to other speakers, links to other educators. Already, before we started recording, we had a really interesting conversation around Kundalini. The questions that have been coming up from the public in the questionnaire have been really remarkable and really, really interesting, and covered a variety of areas. So what I want to do today is have each speaker introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are. And we're going to also and if they have any comments that they want to kind of bring up that has come up for them through the process. I know that I have a few things that I would like to say that have come up since starting this summit that have been interesting. And then we're going to go over some of the questions that people have been filling in on the questionnaire, because part of the outreach was to really collect questions from the public so that we could hear what the pulse was out there. So we've got some amazing questions, and they've really covered a lot of different territory. So first, I would like to really I think I'm just going to go first with the speakers rather than taking up any more of the floor. So Connie Steiner is a psychiatrist in Los Angeles, and somebody who I met at Organon, which is Wilhelm Reich's lab in Rangeley, Maine, and current museum. And so for the last 4 years, I've been involved in really understanding better the work of Wilhelm Reich and who he is. We had an interesting question about him in the questionnaire. So Connie, do you want to come on and just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your work and what you do, and anything that you want to share in relation to even what we talked about yesterday?
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be a part of this. I've been a psychiatrist since the late 1980s. I actually started studying Reich around 1980 itself, 1981. And I was really fascinated by his understanding of body-mind unity, psychosomatic unity. I always had a strong background in the sciences, so my research in his work brought me over to Europe, where I went to medical school. And actually, before I started medical school, I started to learn to meditate as well. The topics you were picking, Meredith, have been a very long interest to me. It seemed Reich's work was revolutionary in many, many ways, and certainly I had. We've lived in a time right now where there's been a lot of changes in sexual mores and culture. And I think it's an important time to be living in, where a huge amount of our understanding of human behavior is simply changed. So I was glad you invited me to be part of this. I think a lot of times people have not connected sexuality with spirituality as often as it maybe has been in other times on our planet. But I think it's also a really important topic. How does one understand our sexual selves and our spiritual selves? Mm-hmm. The science part is kind of I think the innovative part that Reich had contributed to this question. So I hope I can bring something to the table that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did. Our interview was remarkable. Do you want to share a little bit with people some of just a broad outline of what it is that we covered that people will be hearing in the summit in September?
You mean yesterday or the interview?
No, before, like what we actually recorded for your interview. You know, what did we just?
There's so many things that Reich had said. I couldn't exactly remember what we had talked about. Ultimately, I think a really important question that people seek, I think, is what is, not just what is healthy sexuality, but maybe the question people sometimes don't really address is how do they find love most successfully in their relationships? Mm-hmm. By that I mean love that is maybe the deepest or the most intimate love. And obviously in psychiatry, it's Reich saw that very deep, connected, loving relationships lead to less neuroticism, which you'd kind of assume is fairly self-evident. Mm-hmm. But it was also very clear in his time that there was an extraordinary amount of pathology and difficulty people have in achieving that goal. Now that's an understatement. And I think what we are struggling with still, I think, in our culture right now is the fact that even though people have opened up or approached sexuality with less sense of repression, sometimes people also really continue to distort a lot mm-hmm. what truly emancipating, loving sexuality is all about. So yeah. That's an issue. I think right now in the news it's come up quite a bit with the arrests of Jeffrey Epstein and his suicide, and maybe some people have been reading about his I noticed a quote. He had said that he had a biological need for an orgasm 3 times a day. And this is the reason why he solicited young girls to come to his house to massage him and help him have an orgasm. And to have called it a biological need like that reminded me a little bit of a lot of people's misunderstandings of what Wilhelm Reich had said, because they often talk about his ideas leading to potential problems in people's sexually acting out. So that was one topic we were talking about yesterday, Meredith.
Yeah, we were discussing also too, like his ideas around primary and secondary impulses. Yeah. When you mention repression too, because I mean, Wilhelm Reich died in prison in an American jail. He was Austrian. And there's a lot of controversy around it and why. So we covered a lot of that in the interview. There's a lot of misinformation about his life. I was even watching a video, I think it was this morning, where they were saying, and it was an interesting video that was supportive of Reich, but it was also saying, that he had found the cure for cancer, and that's misleading as well. And that's what caused a lot of his problems. And that's what made the man die in jail and have all of his books burned by the US government, which the US government has never done to anyone before ever. So we really told a much rounder, I think a very clearer picture of his story because of the amount of information that you know about it. So that was wonderful.
Well, I hope so.
Talk about, sorry?
Thank you. I hope so.
Yeah, no, it was great. And when you talk about repression too, one thing that really, I just want to share for a moment what I've found interesting about starting the summit. I've never run a summit before. This is really my first dip into the pool of that. It really mattered to me because I love the fact, people signed up from all around the world, which is amazing. And there's a lot of interest in it. And what I find most significant is that the fact that when we collectively agree to not talk about something, that to me seems the ultimate symptom of repression. And we do not talk about sex unless it's, in locker room laughter or the guilt of the conditioned. It's still very, very, very suppressed as something that we can talk about. And one thing that I've really appreciated, one thing on each side, one that's been interesting is the number of people who have been very uncomfortable talking about it, who I even thought were very open-minded. And we're like, no, it's a great idea. I just don't really want to share it with people, because it was almost like the understanding that because I put orgasm in the title, that meant that there was something overtly sexual about me. The same kind of stuff that Kinsey and different people, or I'm sure any of you who in discussing your work, you find that kind of response that as soon as you discuss sexuality, I almost felt as if it meant that we were only going to be talking about something burlesque and salacious and almost, just not to be touched. So I found that interesting because I wasn't expecting it certainly from certain quarters, but I certainly wanted to create the summit in order to be able to open conversation for where those less comfortable with the discussion could feel welcome to come. The other side of it that's been so amazing is the kind of conversations I've had just from doing this, and the kind of questions that have come up, and the ease in which we've been able to have discussions where people can really open up and talk about concerns that they've had. And whether it's a close friend of mine who told me information I didn't know anything about, or somebody I knew nothing about really opening up, we'll hear in the questions today just how you can hear people very happy that they have an opportunity to actually discuss things. So this summit and the three of you speakers are really a great service, and I'm very have a lot of gratitude that you're here to be able to help open up that conversation.
Well, I think the issue of vulnerability and surrender, if that's an essential part of a healthy sexual dynamic, it can be hard for people to want to talk bluntly about things that they usually only embrace when they themselves are willing to be very exposed, and they themselves are willing to surrender to a situation. So I think to some extent it's actually a natural thing, and maybe even a healthy thing, that people feel some need to protect that part of their lives that they feel is the most intimate.
I agree.
But on the other hand, it's also true that unless people are able to have that courage to sometimes speak openly, sometimes they will persist in having problems or difficulties that they maybe don't need to have.
Yeah.
And we also don't learn from each other,
mm-hmm.
which is really important to do. I think even in the time that Reich wrote it, however subtle it is, I can tell there are aspects to his writing that reflect the fact he's a man. And that he has some attitudes about sexuality. That is a man's attitude.
True.
Not to necessarily say with that he was a sexist fellow, but maybe that he maybe could not completely understand how sexuality or love or the sexual embrace is perceived by women.
Right. That's a really good point. Well, we'll definitely get into that a little bit with the questions that we're going to. So thank you so much for that introduction. Barry, would you like to go next?
Okay. I'm a behavioral neuroscientist. I guess the way I can describe what I've been doing is some of the work that some of the observations I've made. I studied sexual response in women and men, the nerve pathways involved and the brain areas involved. So we have identified where orgasm occurs in the brains in women and men. Actually, my work was the first to show where orgasm occurs in women's brain. Also, I've been mapping the pathway from the clitoris, vagina, and cervix to the sensory cortex and through the spinal cord. Some of my work was in women with severed spinal cord, and I showed that they can feel the vaginal and cervical stimulation even though the spinal cord is severed, and I showed that they do so via the vagus nerves. I've shown that vaginal stimulation has a very profound pain blocking action. We studied a lot of that.
That a lot in the interview. And I want to just interject here to say that, you know, Barry is doing the cutting edge research that is informing the medical community. So we go over in the interview things around, for instance, cervical cancer in women, how they're working with the LEAP process, what the issues are around that both medical doctors and women need to know about. So I really just want to take a moment to honor you, Barry, so that people really understand that you are one of the main researchers who, as you said, are doing things that nobody has done before. Your dedication to the field of just your sheer interest and passion in wanting to be able to understand the body and really educate the public and, very importantly, the medical industry, so that they're understanding. He is part and parcel of the kinds of people that are really doing the research that allows medicine to advance. So that's what the area is.
We could, hopefully they'll pay attention to it, but that's always a problem. But because in two cases, they don't even know what we're talking about. In the case of persistent genital arousal disorder,
right, which we talked about a lot.
MDs have never heard of it, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about the nervous system. A beautiful example is that one of the things that I've been studying recently with Erwin Goldstein and Chol Kim in San Diego is this condition called persistent genital arousal disorder, where women, and now we see men also, have genital awareness that some describe it as an itch, persistent itch that they can't scratch, and it's very distressing to them. And
I'm just going to stop you here because we do go into a lot of detail about that, but I just want to link that over to Connie, who was just talking about Epstein, and that's really based on the same sort of idea of that constant scratch and need that one could call a biological need, but you actually have the science of understanding, which is also very connected to a Reichian perspective, that he was really one of the first who was noticing the difference between full discharge orgasmically or almost reaching. And so there's a real link between what Reich was talking about years ago and what you're discovering scientifically now.
That's what a lot of the women describe of being at the verge of orgasm, but they can't experience an orgasm. And if they do experience an orgasm, it makes it worse. It makes it more intense. It's a very troubling syndrome.
Mm-hmm. We actually have a question related to that as well. We have one of the questions that's kind of related to that as well that we're going to go over in this Q&A period. So I don't want to cut anyone off, but I also know we need to answer some of the questions, and I want to keep this as brief as possible. So I'm just going to jump over quickly to Michaela, if that's okay.
Sure.
Michaela, welcome. This is our discussion on spirituality, on the section of spirituality. Welcome.
Well, I'll keep this very short because I think there's some quite interesting questions.
Can she speak up?
Can you hear me okay?
No.
You just have to speak up loudly, yeah.
Okay, well, I can probably plug in a headset and do a little bit better than that. Let's see if that makes a difference. No, that won't make a difference.
Just maybe get closer to the microphone.
Just, come in closer to the computer.
How about that?
Better?
Okay, so I'll keep it very short. My name is Michaela Baum, and I'm actually Austrian, so that ties in with the Wilhelm Reich link here. And I work on the intersection of, I want to say, embodiment, relationship, and sexuality. So my main focus these days is working with people in an experiential setting on unearthing the underlying motivations for relationship, for spirituality, for sexuality. And I'm going at it a lot through the body and the nervous system, because all the sex tips in the world are not going to do much if your nervous system is traumatized or your body is desensitized. There's other things going on. So I come at it from the body and from an understanding of trauma in the nervous system, and also an understanding of the relational versus the sexual dynamics, which are very different dynamics in my experience. And I've done about, give or take, between 40 and 42,000 one-on-one counseling hours in my lifetime so far. And I've been teaching for about 15 years in the kind of experiential situations where I'm walking people through how to be within their own body vis-a-vis another person's body. So I've gone away from classical counseling entirely and am pretty much only teaching these days. So that's a very, very quick and fast introduction.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm going to just jump into some questions that everybody's, and any of the speakers can jump in on this. Also, for those of you who are on the call, you can put in some questions on chat and Jade will take a look at them. And if we have some time at the end, we'll go through some direct ones from you guys on chat, and maybe you'll have some ideas while we're actually going through the talks, or the questions rather. So I'm going to start with, there's a lot, one thing that really came up that was interesting to me were questions around the kind of bizarre things that happen around sexuality, not even necessarily with a partner, but with oneself. So one person said, will you be covering anything on what would be called spiritual orgasms? So Michaela, I'm going to direct this one to you. But of course, any of the speakers can definitely answer as well. I'm a female and have experienced orgasm without any genital stimulation. The orgasm was full body or a sense of every cell being shaken and lit, different from orgasm with my husband during intercourse, yet some similarities. A friend recently told me that she had a full body orgasm while relaxing in a river and enjoying the beauty of nature. There was no genital stimulation. Looking forward to your response. Thanks.
And you're directing this towards me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, I think, one of the things that I just want to make sure is that, of course, what I personally really want to say is that our entire body is an instrument of perception. Mm-hmm. And as such, our human beings have developed to have enormous perception in the body. That's what's kept us alive and has made us who we are these days, right? And we are only aware of a very small fraction of what that instrument of perception can do and can experience. Mm-hmm. And of course, the more, I sometimes call it ambient noise, so meaning the more external input and stimulation and noise there is, the less we can access the things that are actually happening in our body. Mm-hmm. So most of us still have our basic, let's call them spidey senses in place, right? Where when somebody looks at you from behind, we can still tell for the most part, which is a predator response that, human beings have gathered over time. And the same is true with pleasure. Pleasure is actually something that's very, very useful from another perspective than just the hedonistic aspect that people sometimes go for, right? Because all sensual input is very important in a human being. And, that goes from tasting something and it tasting really horrible and you spitting it out somewhere in the jungle or in the woods to sexual pleasure. And so I just want to say that because when people say a full body orgasm, it puts it into a category where I'm not sure it should solely reside. I think it should go into the category of the body being so relaxed and the messages of the body being heard by the human that the potential for full body ecstasy or full body joy or full body sensation, because some people find pain pleasurable, right, in certain scenarios. So you're suddenly aware of these things. So when people call it a spiritual orgasm or a full body orgasm, I'm always a bit, because it gives it a label that classifies the person as something special or as more advanced, not this questioner in particular, but in the, tantric traditions, that's often kind of the mark of, somebody who thinks they're better off than others, which is not necessarily true. It's just that in that particular moment, either through sheer luck, good grace, or practice, it can happen through practice, you were able to actually feel the life force that's always available to us coming through the body fully. And that's then often called a full body orgasm. And it's a fairly common report that women experience this in water. right? In the ocean or in a bathtub, because the body relaxes, the entire body opens. And with that, a whole bunch of sensation comes online that's usually not online. And of course, by now we know, and I'm really excited to hear more from Barry on this with the vagus nerve and the cervix and things like that, which has been something I've been endlessly curious about, and there's not much research on that. That of course we have whole areas in our body that can create enormous amounts of energy and pleasure without any stimulation, and the cervix is certainly one of them. And so that's, I guess, my take on is there such thing as a spiritual orgasm? I think it's a bit reductionist to call it a spiritual orgasm personally, but I would say yes, the sensations described absolutely have happened to people I know, to myself, to people I work with, and it can be expanded upon, and you can learn how to reliably feel such things.
Right. And I think what amazing.
Can I comment on that?
Oh, please do, Barry.
Yes, please.
I was very skeptical about claims of orgasm without any physical stimulation, and Gina Ogden, who's a sex therapist, said that she has many women who claim that. And so in collaboration with Gina and Beverly Whipple, we did a physiological study of 10 women who claimed that they could have orgasms just by thought alone. So we measured their heart rate, blood pressure, their pupil diameter, which is an indication that the pupils dilate markedly during orgasm, and also their pain thresholds, their sensitivity to pain, and by putting compression on the finger and asking when it hurts. And so in the case of orgasm, normally each of those 4 measures doubles approximately. In other words, the blood pressure, the heart rate, the pupil diameter, and the pain thresholds all approximately double. So we measured, we took these measurements in the women who claimed that they could experience orgasm just by thought alone. And indeed, all those measures did show significant increases, comparable to when the same women applied physical clitoral self-stimulation. So there was no significant difference between the magnitude of the increases when they claimed that they had orgasms just by thinking, compared to when they had orgasms by physical self-stimulation. So I'm convinced. And then we've done some brain imaging of women who claim that, and we see the same areas of the brain, or many of the same areas, not all, but many of the same areas of the brain are activated in these women when they claim they have orgasms. So certainly, I asked them, what do they do to have to elicit the orgasms? And it was very, very different. Some women said that they had some said erotic thoughts when their lover, thinking of when their lover whispered sweet nothings in their ear. But other women said that it was walking along the seashore on a warm afternoon and having this wonderful pastoral experience. And other women said that it was much more abstract. They had the sensation of the chakras moving up and down the spine. So, but they're doing it, and I'm convinced that it's real, that you think yourself into orgasms. Even some men have sent me emails saying that they have been able to do the same thing, but I haven't studied them actually physiologically.
I mean, I find it very interesting too when you consider dreams. Sorry, Michaela, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to actually say that about too, because a lot of people have spontaneous orgasms while sleeping.
Right.
I was just
and
exactly that.
You know, and there's no stimulation involved.
Are you sure? Because they could be getting physical stimulation, moving.
Yeah, they could, but you know, I mean, I've been a woman my entire life, you know, and I've actually, you know, done a lot of these things myself, particularly cervical orgasms and internal cervical orgasms without stimulation. I've actually practiced and learned how to do that and to teach other people how to do that.
You mean thinking of cervical stimulation?
No, you don't think about it at all. It has to do with a feeling sense and the location in the body. And then it has very little to do with the locus itself, because a clitoral orgasm, of all the orgasms, it's not wrong or bad, but it's a fairly reductionist sensation in the body, right? It's not nearly what it's like when you have these internal orgasms of all kinds. And so because the entire system is involved in a cervical orgasm, you don't actually think of cervical stimulation, which for most women actually is quite painful for a number of reasons, as we know. But it has to do, I'm saying this in a very woo-woo kind of a way. It's not very scientific, but what it feels like is the connection between your heart, the love opening and the body opening. And so women often describe that they can kind of feel it down their arms. They're almost weepy. That's why it sometimes happens in water or a beautiful sunset or in nature. So it's a becoming one with nature. And that, for some odd reason, has a very strong result in the opening of that area, the cervical area, and then it ripples up and can ripple up through the throat, out the arms. So, and you can actually train for that. It takes a little while, and it takes a fairly, I want to say, rigorous approach to relaxation in the body, but it can be trained for. And you can learn how to do it in meditation. In some of the tantric tradition, it's done in meditation.
Olivia Bryant in England does that. She trains women to be aware of cervical sensation, and they have very profound orgasms from that.
Yes, Olivia, I know Olivia well, and that's her whole entire thing. Yeah.
I have a question, Barry. With these orgasms that the women have, how long do they last? I ask only because I have also witnessed in a spiritual retreat someone, not myself, but who was clearly in a state of orgasm for a very, very long time. And I wouldn't say that was every person in the room, but certainly was pretty clear for one participant in this larger group. So it seems, certainly in the tantric tradition, I'm presuming as well, this is, I don't practice tantra, but it's another type of meditation. But I just wondered, how long were the women able to elicit this orgasmic response?
Well, this reminds me of a funny anecdote that we were studying women having orgasms in the functional MRI scanner, and we asked them to raise their finger while they were having the orgasm. And this one woman raised her finger, and she kept her finger up for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then she put it down, and when she came out, we said, that was remarkable. You had an orgasm for 30 minutes or more. And she said, yeah, but my climax was only about 20 seconds. So it's a question. Orgasm for her was the arousal and the good feeling, whereas climax was what we call orgasm. So I think that you have to be careful about what people are calling orgasm.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's true. I mean, I never asked this particular meditator if she was having an orgasm, but looking at her, it seemed pretty clear. I just never seen anybody sitting there with such obviously physical response. And normally our meditation is still, people are still, but she was not.
That didn't seem to be the case in that particular study. Although the women with persistent genital arousal disorder who have described that they have orgasms that just go on for minutes, and it's extremely troublesome.
Interesting. Thanks.
So it's interesting that somebody just private messaged me and was talking about dreams as well, and said that she has the most intense orgasm dreams. And what did she say? And that also recently she'd been feeling cervical orgasms, which she'd never experienced in real life. And I will say as well that when you say, are you sure that they were dreaming and there was no genital stimulation? I will say, I have personally had dreams where I wake up, and men with wet dreams, waking up with wet dreams. And I've definitely had sexual dreams, and I wake up in a state of orgasm. If I wake up too quickly, I don't finish the orgasm. So I've got to be in a state, somehow my wiring, or, you know, they are doing, and this is what's so interesting, and this is what we're talking about, is how, and you've done a lot of research on the actual wiring of things. But what I want to really kind of point out is that there's a whole field now coming up that the new term for it is neurotheology. And it's the understanding of mystical states and bliss states in our actual wiring and what's going on, that's actually starting to be really looked into. So I think what this question highlights that this person wrote in is the idea that we are having sensory experiences and states of bliss and orgastic release without the traditional friction kind of ways of working with it. And that brings us to a whole question of where does science and where does spirituality meet? Where does the energetic and what we haven't, when we say spirituality, to me, it almost means the science that we haven't documented yet. It doesn't have to be such an out there kind of word, but the fact that sexuality is so connected to nature and the natural rhythms of life, and that when those things merge, we seem to have ecstatic spaces that can also be considered mystical or spiritual, I think is really what we're on the cutting edge of discovering and discussing. So that was rich.
I'd like to just add to the pathological, on the pathological side, talking about the cervix, and you mentioned it earlier, this LEAP procedure, which is it's electrosurgical. It's a cautery of scooping out with a hot wire, scooping out a part of the cervix. That's done for cases of cervical cancer. But we're seeing a number of women who claim that after this procedure, they lose libido, they lose whole body sensations throughout the body. They lose erotic sensation throughout the body. Taking out the cervix apparently can have very profound effects throughout the body. You're describing the powerful effect of cervical stimulation having a deep bodily reaction of stimulus, deep body orgasms. That's certainly the case. We see that when we see, I mean, these women with the severed spinal cords had orgasms from cervical self-stimulation. But the women who have this LEAP procedure, it's called loop electrosurgical excision procedure. That's what it's an acronym for, LEEP. And they lose erotic sensation throughout the whole body after just this seemingly trivial procedure. That at least their surgeons say it's trivial, but it's not trivial at all.
Thank you for bringing that up, because we do go into that in detail in the summit, and it's a really super important part of your research that you've been doing. So beautiful. Does anyone else have any comments before I go on to the next question? Okay, here's one about, I'm a 59-year-old woman who has never had a vaginal orgasm. She asks a lot of questions about details that are deeper that we could maybe go into in the actual summit with you, Barry. But in this question, is the aftermath of bikini incision of a lower abdominal surgery for benign ovarian cyst removal, would that possibly be a reason that she would have less stimulus of a vaginal orgasm? Do either one of you, Michaela or Barry, want to look at that? Do you think that would actually cause less sensory awareness and ability to orgasm by having those lower abdominal incisions?
Well, you know, I was shocked listening to an obstetric surgeon describing how hysterectomies are performed through an abdominal incision. And he said that they make the incision and reach in, grab the uterus and cut it out. And I was shocked to hear that. They don't even look at what they're doing. They just reach in and cut it out. So there are the pelvic nerve, the hypogastric nerve, the pudendal nerve, the vagus nerve. They're all in that region. And if the surgeon doesn't care about innervation, about nerve supply, which apparently they don't seem to care about it. They're very, you know, at conferences where I talk to gynecologists and obstetricians, they say they're so naive about the nervous system. They know the organs, but they don't even know anything about the nerve supply. It's incredible to me. So it doesn't surprise me at all that if they do an abdominal decision to take out ovaries surgically, the sensory nerves from the vagina and the cervix are right there. So they could be cutting them without knowing it, and that leads to lack of sensation. I published the study with Beverly Whipple and Eleni Frangos a few years ago on hysterectomy and the consequence of hysterectomy. And in every case, we reviewed 22 studies. In almost every case, they said that there was just an improvement, the lack of pain and lack of bleeding. So there was a significant improvement after the hysterectomy. However, each of the papers said in a few cases there was a loss of sensitivity in the vagina, and so and a lot of women had told me that they lose sensation in the vagina after hysterectomy. So you're cutting nerves of passage in taking out one organ. There are nerves that carry sensation from the other organs. It's a complex wiring, and if you just reach in and remove an organ, you're cutting nerves coming from elsewhere. So It's not at all surprising that women can lose vaginal sensation if through an abdominal incision that takes out the ovaries.
Okay, so that's worth her looking at then. Thank you. I have another question for you here. This is from a woman. Actually, I'm not sure it is a woman. Someone who's 62, and it's probably been 4 years since they've had an orgasm. And the question is, does the sexual pathway of the neurons in the brain diminish unless one orgasms regularly?
I don't think anybody knows the answer to that.
Michaela, do you have any insight?
Certainly not at 62. 62 is still young.
Yeah.
Unless there's some kind of degenerative neural disease. I mean, there is degeneration of neurons and nerves in cases of diabetes, because neurons have very high metabolic rate, and since the metabolic rate is compromised in diabetes, that does compromise neural activity. And certainly in degenerative neural disease like ALS or multiple sclerosis or even Alzheimer's, there are degenerative processes. Mm-hmm. But if in the absence of those kinds of pathologies, I don't know of any evidence of loss of neural function, certainly by the age of in the 60s.
Right. Okay. So aside from a pathological point of view, Michaela, do you have anything that you want to add to that? And
yeah, I mean, I certainly would say that there's a certain kind of whatever you don't use recedes, right? So most people that I've worked with in that particular area, right, like lack of sensation and stuff like that, it's not just one thing for the most part. When you dig in there, you'll find that there's some relational trauma, or sometimes people fantasize about certain things that are no longer good for them, right? So I had a woman who had a very specific sexual fantasy that had to do with a man who she had broken up with, and so she suddenly, anytime she would orgasm, or would try to orgasm, right, would masturbate, that the entire pain came up, and then of course that short-circuited her arousal cycle and everything with it. So I think that there's many reasons why somebody suddenly no longer feels a lot of arousal. Some of them, of course, are hormonal, as we age and things like that. But there's certainly an aspect of being connected with your body in a essential way that if you don't do, you lose the habitual or the entrainment, so to speak, that comes with it. And that you'll hear a lot, right? Where for whatever reason, somebody got very, very busy, or they had a baby or career things, and they stop having pleasure, self-pleasure, or other people's pleasure. And then it takes a while till the body wakes back up, till the habits around, because arousal patterns have a lot to do with body patterns. And there's a question somewhere in here where somebody's talking about, maybe this is the same woman, about having migraines after a clitoral orgasm.
I was going to mention that, and I'm just going to read that part to you because it was actually from the woman who was talking about the ovarian system, bikini incision things. She said,
yeah,
small clitoral orgasms, that usually I develop an intense, sudden, and very painful migraine when trying to masturbate and clitoral orgasms.
Yeah.
Stop shy of it.
Yeah. So when you look at the mechanisms of how people learn about sex, like orgasms, it's usually masturbation before they have sex with other people, right? If it all goes well, that's how it goes, right? Where your first sexual experience is with yourself, usually secretly, of course, and often very quickly. Right? That's how it goes. And so, of course, the body learns patterns of arousal and stimulation. And most women, by the time they are actually becoming sexually active, have very established arousal patterns that include certain tension patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And the tension patterns have to do with, just how they hold their body. That also has to do with the fact that in a clitoral orgasm, tension builds and then releases, versus, for instance, in a cervical orgasm, with each relaxation, the orgasm gets longer and bigger, for instance, right? So in clitoral orgasm, you're kind of clenching down and you're kind of folding in, and you're tensing certain parts of your body, very much like men report. I'm not a man, so I speak secondhand information here, but where there's a certain kind of a pressure needed to get over the edge unless it's retrained. Mm-hmm. And that particular pressure, in the extreme case, people say they get really fast heartbeats, or, they almost have, it feels like the head explodes, and a lot of people get headaches. That's a fairly common thing. Mm-hmm. You can repattern your tension patterns around arousal, but that takes some time because these things get looped in very, very early on, mm-hmm. And many, many, many times over, both men and women. In boys, it's even more prevalent, where, for instance, I had a client once, she had a bed that was against her sisters, like they were next to each other. So when she would secretly masturbate, she'd move one leg in and turn a bit over. And so even in sex, when she wanted to orgasm, she had to kind of assume that position,
right? Because
that was looped into her nervous system as the way of arousal. Yeah. So that all said, that can happen, that people have those very strong patterns around it. And then if you stop having any kind of stimulation with yourself, that subsides, but there's nothing else there. So I could definitely see that it would take a moment of re-engaging with the body and finding a renewed sensuality and sensual awareness, and finding a different way of touching to bring something else up that's not connected to that extreme clench and all of those things.
Can I add something about the lack of sensation? We're seeing that there's a pathology that which is a herniated intervertebral discs in the lower lumbar region. That is when the disc between each vertebrae, typically with some kind of trauma, like a car accident or a fall or a heavy lifting, the disc can bulge. Right. And the disc between the vertebrae can bulge. It's called a herniated intervertebral disc or an annular tear. The disc pushes on the nerve roots that are going in the spinal canal from the genitals. And what we're seeing is that this condition can initially cause pain and persistent genital arousal. It's stimulating the genital sensory nerves. But if this goes a long time, over a period of years, there's actually a deterioration in the sensation, and people become, both women and men become numb. You get genital numbness. So there could be the fact that this woman is not perceiving genital sensation could be a consequence of long-term deterioration of the genital sensory nerves caused by the herniated intervertebral disc. And this is can be diagnosed by an MRI of the lumbosacral region. And actually, we're seeing that this is with Chol Kim and Erwin Goldstein at San Diego. We're seeing that when Chol Kim, who's a spine surgeon, reduces the herniated disc even in people who have numbness and who have reported that years before that they had genital irritation or pain, that now they're numb. They could be anejaculatory or anorgasmic in the case of men, or just numb in the case of women, or lack of orgasm in the case of women. When Dr. Kim reduces the herniation and reduces the impaction on the genital sensory nerve roots, the people regain sensation. It's not guaranteed, but many of I'm very surprised at that, because some of these men and women say they've been numb for years, and now they get their sensation back. So that could be another cause of a lack of awareness or lack of genital sensation, and that can be diagnosed and treated. So you know, if that's another possibility, she could have an MRI, and you know, we could evaluate that if she's interested.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's very interesting, and I really appreciate your input, Barry, as well as yours, Michaela, because obviously with age, or as we live, all sorts of trauma can occur, and illness can occur that does affect our nervous
degeneration of the bones, osteoporosis.
Absolutely.
The vertebrae start shrinking,
collapsing,
and that causes a disruption in the intervertebral discs and can put pressure on the nerve roots.
And you're absolutely right. Also, the fact we sit so much in modern society, we have extraordinary amounts of back pain, lower back pain, mostly because we're a sedentary culture in many ways. Our jobs, people sit at their desks. It's extremely common. But I think it was very nice to hear your kind of specific information about it, because I think, again, we have problems with talking openly about sexual dysfunction, and that includes people who lose sensation or people who have pain, and they don't want to talk up about it. And there aren't a lot of doctors available who even know anything about the topic. I know that for a fact.
That's true.
Yeah. And so, and it was really interesting to hear you, Michaela, to point out the fact that you can re-entrain pathways to restore sensation, or even to find a different way to engage your body more fully in the pleasure process. Because aging, it happens to everyone. There's no one who's not going to go through this process. At some point in time, things don't work as well anymore. Our eyes, we don't see as well, we don't hear as well, you name it. So it's interesting to hear you both speak about it, because I think that's also a topic that is hardly ever discussed, is sexuality as we age in any real detail. It's even more unusual to discuss, actually.
I just want to add something quickly, that Chol Kim, who's the spine surgeon who we work with, he has hundreds of patients who have come to him over the years for lower back pain, buttock pain, leg pain, foot pain. And I asked him about half a year ago, I said, how many of these people complain about any genital discomfort? Because it's the same nerves, the same group of nerves, it's the sacral nerves. He said he doesn't know. So he added to his questionnaire because he gives everybody coming into the office a questionnaire on where the pain is and what the constellation of pain is, what parts of the body. So I told him to add questions about genital pain, anything about the genital. And he said now 15% of the people are answering that they do have genital problems in addition to the leg, back, and buttock pain and foot pain that they described. So and that may even be a low estimate, because they may be reluctant and embarrassed to talk about it.
Sure.
But asking about it. So it is associated with the back problems and the intervertebral problems and the vertebrae. So that's something that has to be considered, particularly in aging.
Yes.
That's beautiful. I want to just add something that actually links all three of you together and my work as well. And we are getting really close to 1 o'clock. We have 5 minutes left, and I really want to just keep this to an hour. Clearly, there's a lot to discuss. That's why we're running the summit, and there's more questions. I have lots more questions down here that I wanted to ask. But this is what I find really interesting about what we were just discussing. So whether we're talking about nerve impingement due to disc herniations, or whether we're talking about, as Michaela was discussing, particular looping patterns of how one entrains oneself to have an orgasm for various reasons, or whether we're talking about Reichian tension bands and armoring, which is critical. And what we're discussing is how the psyche interprets information, causes an emotional reaction, creates physical restriction, which impedes blood flow and can impinge on nerves. So this entire discussion is actually an emotional one. And it responds and creates different responses in the body on a physical level that can be mapped medically, and also from a perspective of the kind of opening and body perceptory awareness that Michaela is talking about, and the kind of groundbreaking work that Reich did, because he was the first person to really start touching bodies instead of having the back, a psychiatrist turned with his back to the room, listening to somebody freely associate. So he actually, and then he got into like taking off clothes so he could see skin colors and breathing patterns. And that of course just made him a weird sex freak from the top. But what we're talking about is this beautiful melange between the spiritual and the scientific, and the groundbreaking pioneering work that's been happening, which is based on the body responding emotionally and causing contraction. And that includes aging. My mother, for instance, is 88 years old. Her body is now at the point getting difficult for her, but she's still teaching the somatic stretch work we've always done. She doesn't look anything like the 88-year-olds running around, because she has been continually working on embodiment. And that keeps her, I'm still teaching at 88 and very, very live, and it surprises a lot of people. So that's just one example out of many where aging and sexual difficulties or medical issues can actually really come down to having embodiment practices. And that's a mind-body association. So we're really meeting there. We're East and West, and mind and body, and past and present, and medicine and spirituality, if I could go that far, actually merge. So there's 3 minutes left, and I'm just going to give anyone the floor if they want to say that. But I just want to say thank you very much for a really stimulating conversation, and one that really brings all three of your knowledge and skill sets together, including that of my own as a somatic therapist. I think we just made a really spontaneous, beautiful weaving there. So anyone has the floor. Is there anyone? Jade just put out that there's the summit in September. We're going to be running the actual summit September 3rd, and not September 3rd, sorry, the 3rd week of September. We're going to have 3 different days, and each day there's going to be one of the callers, and I've already interviewed each of them. Each call is almost 2 hours long, because as you can see, there's so much to discuss with each speaker. And then the speaker will be on live afterwards to answer your questions and discuss. So there's a link there for you that Jade has just put in the chat. Otherwise, you'll receive it in email. If you're interested in joining us for the summit, it's still on the half-off discounted price until September 1st. So that's my little plug to be able to share more with the speakers, learn from them. And we will be sharing links to their books and workshops and different things so that you can have direct access to their wisdom and their skill set. I think that's all that I want to say for now. Does anybody want to say anything before we close? Or?
Well, I just wanted to add a possibility of a connection between the orgasm and migraine headache is there are tremendous changes in blood pressure and heart rate and blood pressure during orgasm, up and down. And this could, and certainly migraines are affected by change in circulation in the meninges. So that could be a mechanism, some kind of disrupted circulatory effect in the meninges of the brain that, as a result of the tremendous changes in blood pressure and blood flow. So that could be a connection.
That's great. Thank you for pointing that out. So I'm going to, I just sent out to everyone my personal email address if you want to ask more questions, receive more about the questionnaire or what have you. I just want to thank all of you for being willing to participate in an open discussion, which I really feel is helping change our society and our world. I remember saying to Barry years ago when I first met him, you'd think that if we wanted to know what life was about, that there would be a study for orgasm in every city. And he just cracked up and he was like, yeah, not going to happen. But I think that's important because we need to take away all of the concern and the shame and have an open discussion. And you've all contributed to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will see you at the summit the 3rd week of September. Until then, everyone take care. Thanks.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Pleasure meeting you.
Great meeting.